You see? I'm a public official. So everything I do is for the public's perusement. So my job is to do the best that I can. I've not been funded. They pay you to not talk about things they don't want you to talk about. They tell you that themselves.
You see, when a man like me says I'm a public official, I don't mean I hold some badge or sit behind a mahogany desk in a city building. I mean I've been forced into a position where everything I say, every step I take, every truth I hint at is not just watched, but studied, archived and dissected for the public's perusement. And that means my job, my real job, is not just to entertain, but to survive long enough to do the best that I can for the people who still believe in unfiltered truth. And you learn quickly in this business that survival has its own rules, because I've not been funded, not in the way the machine funds its own. And when they can't buy you, they pay you to keep quiet by other means. They make the silences more profitable than the speeches. They pay you not to talk about the things they don't want you to talk about. And they tell you that themselves with a smile that doesn't reach their eyes. So when a man like Katt Williams sits down for an interview and lets the dam burst, you better understand that what came out of his mouth 2 weeks ago might have signed his own exit ticket. And we are not exaggerating when we say it felt like a final confession, because his eyes darted around like he was clocking exits. His voice trembled in places where his jokes normally land sharp, and for the first time in a long, chaotic career filled with lawsuits, arrests, and beefs with A-listers, he didn't sound like a comedian. He sounded like a man who could hear the footsteps getting closer, the kind of man who knows the walls aren't just closing in, they've already touched his shoulders. And so he warned us, in plain language, that this industry isn't just dangerous in some vague, metaphorical way. It is actively hunting certain people, taking them out not figuratively, not career-wise, but literally. And the first name he dropped, the first person he held up as proof, was Malcolm-Jamal Warner, a man the world knew as Theo Huxtable, but who in his final months had been pushing an independent narrative through his podcast and private projects, stepping off the carefully paved road the machine had laid out for him. And according to Katt, Malcolm didn't just drown in Costa Rica, he was silenced. And when Katt says something like that, it's not a casual remark, it's a signal. Because there are more than a few people inside Hollywood whispering the same thing. That Warner, who had been quietly questioning why the media insists on narrowing the black experience into a single, marketable image, had wandered into deeper water than any ocean could hold. And when you watch Katt in that interview, you can see it, a cocktail of rage and dread mixed into his expression. This wasn't a hot take designed to go viral. This was a man sending up a flare from a sinking ship, a warning from someone who has already survived more than one brush with Hollywood's underworld. And when he turned the conversation toward Warner's death, he didn't soften the blow. He called it a message, a sign to the rest of the entertainers who might think about going off script. And then, almost as an afterthought, but with the weight of inevitability, he revealed that he's now receiving threats, multiple, anonymous, both digital and in person, claiming he's being followed. And while we've all heard paranoid claims from celebrities who live at the edges of fame, something about this one hits different because this time he has receipts. This time, someone else has already turned up lifeless, and the timeline doesn't lie. Early that morning in Costa Rica, Warner had gone down to the coastline just before sunrise, and sometime after stepping into the water, something happened. Details are scarce. But authorities eventually found his body hundreds of yards down the shoreline, wedged in a rocky cove, battered by the tide, and the official version reads like an accident report. Caught in a current, bystanders tried to save him, CPR for 20 minutes. Pronounced dead at the scene. But the irregularities stack up fast if you're willing to look closely, because another man, a 29-year-old from Nicaragua, had jumped in to help. And at first the story was that he was in critical condition. Then days later he's discharged, fully recovered. Not a scratch, no public statement, not even a name. Just vanished. And that's where the online sleuths and at least one former studio bodyguard say the silent witness conspiracy begins, because maybe he saw something in that water or just after, and maybe he was told to keep quiet, fast-tracked out of the hospital, maybe even relocated. And the fact that no media outlet has even tried to track him down. Not one interview request, not one headline is almost louder than the official story, because this wasn't just some random beachgoer. This was a man who was physically involved in the same incident that killed one of the most beloved black actors in American television history, and yet silence. And if you think the list stops there, you haven't been paying attention, because the whispers that follow Warner's name are the same whispers that have followed others who tried to walk off the Hollywood plantation with their own stories intact. And the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to tell where the curse ends and the conspiracy begins. Because the so-called Cosby curse has always been framed as superstition, an eerie footnote for tabloids to print in October columns, but for those inside the machine, it's a shorthand for something they won't put in writing. The price exacted on those who try to separate themselves from the sanitized legacy that show built, and if you chart the trajectory of the cast members, you start to see the same slope, the sudden disappearances, the abrupt career pivots, the uncharacteristic implosions, the quiet blackballing. And the one common denominator is that no one gets to keep the kind of clean, aspirational image that The Cosby Show sold to America without paying for it in some way later. And Lisa Bonet's blacklisting is whispered about like a cautionary tale in backrooms, not because she lacked talent, but because she clashed with the vision, wanted something grittier, something truer, and found herself erased from major projects for years. And Tempest Bledsoe, who withdrew almost entirely from the spotlight, citing private reasons no one ever pressed her on, and Raven Simonet, whose public statements about the industry seem like riddles wrapped in polite PR smiles, and then Bill Cosby himself, imploded in front of the world in a scandal so wide it swallowed the very cultural moment that made him an icon. And yet through all that chaos, Malcolm-Jamal Warner managed to walk between the raindrops, staying scandal-free, building a quiet career, protecting his private life, and maybe that's why his sudden death hit so differently, because he was the one the public thought was untouchable, the one who played the game without selling out, the one who stayed in his lane, and so when the headlines came in, accidental drowning, vacation gone wrong, it landed like a glitch in the matrix. A reminder that even the safest player can be taken off the board if they start rewriting their own script. And the thing about Warner in his final months is that he was doing exactly that, launching Not All Hood, a podcast designed to fracture the monolith of black identity the mainstream profits from, talking openly about legacy, about being more than Theo, about telling layered, complicated stories that didn't fit the industry's box, and maybe to the casual listener that sounded like an artist evolving, but to those who understand the coded language of Hollywood descent, it sounded like a man warming up to say something bigger, something riskier. And in this town, once you hint at that, the countdown starts and Katt Williams knows it, which is why he framed Warner's death as a message, a clean removal disguised as misfortune. And when you look at the gaps in the story, the unnamed Nicaraguan man, the missing media pursuit, the fast-tracked hospital discharge, the absence of even a stock quote from local officials. The whole thing starts to feel like a script with missing pages, the kind where the deleted scenes would tell you everything, and if you've been tracking Katt's own arc, you know he's been living on the edges of this same script for years, surviving legal ambushes, PR assassinations, and financial ice baths designed to shrink him into irrelevance. And yet each time he crawls back with more names, more details, more cuts into the facade. Like when he mocked Diddy's Costco baby oil stash, knowing full well the punchline would stick because the absurdity made it memorable, but also because the humor was a delivery system for something sharper. The idea that behind the parties, behind the luxury optics, there's leverage, and behind the leverage there's control. And when the raids hit Diddy's properties months later, it retroactively painted Katt as either psychic or connected, and neither one of those makes the industry comfortable. And now his life has slowed into something more like a fugitive's than a comedian's. No fixed address, rotating security teams, using decoys for travel, all while the internet spins the theory of a hit list, a literal roster of those deemed too dangerous to let run wild. And the names range from faded pop stars to activists to journalists whose feeds go dark overnight. And if Warner's name was at the top, who's to say Katt's isn't etched just beneath it? Because the playbook doesn't change. They isolate, discredit, starve. And if that fails, they silence. And Katt has endured the first three for over a decade, living in the crossfire of lawsuits, arrests, public meltdowns conveniently caught on camera, and smear campaigns that paint him as erratic, volatile, unstable. The kind of labels that make it easier to dismiss him when he does drop a T. And the thing is, once you start lining up the bodies, the coincidences start collapsing into patterns, ugly, rigid, almost mathematical patterns that stretch across decades and genres, and what the public calls the curse, the insiders call the cleanup. Because every few years there's another one, a voice that was getting too loud, a figure who had begun breaking rank, and they vanish in ways that look tragic on TMZ but antiseptic in the paperwork. Because there's never the kind of chaos you'd expect from a real accident. It's always clean, contained, timed for weekends or holiday news cycles when public focus is low, and that's the part that sticks with you. Because Malcolm-Jamal Warner's drowning in Nicaragua slots neatly into the same template as Michael K. Williams' overdose in Brooklyn, as Whitney Houston's bathtub accident in Beverly Hills, as Brittany Murphy's pneumonia in her own home. And when you start revisiting those cases through the lens of Katt's hit list theory, you notice the same things. Sealed toxicology details, missing security footage, vague witness statements that feel rehearsed, and a flurry of legal cleanups behind the scenes, wills updated just months prior, properties quietly transferred, streaming contracts frozen, all of it happening with the precision of an operation, not the chaos of fate. And Katt has been screaming this for years, in between the jokes, in between the viral moments, because he knows the humor disarms you long enough to plant the seed. And when he name-dropped Diddy in that interview, it wasn't about the baby oil. It was about the network of rooms, the doors you have to go through to get what they promise, and the people who own those doors. And if you believe him, or the growing number of whistleblowers whose NDAs are expiring, those rooms are less about pleasure and more about leverage, about compromising footage, about the kind of dirt that keeps even the loudest stars quiet for decades. And when the feds raided Diddy's properties and whispers of sealed video evidence started circulating, it felt like confirmation to the small circle who already knew Warner was about to record with guests who had dirt on those same circles, guests whose own careers had been strangled after refusing deals. And if you've been paying attention, you know the cleanest way to shut down a project isn't to censor it, that draws suspicion, but to erase the face attached to it, because once the central voice is gone, the rest scatter, fearful of becoming the next name on the list. And Katt has been living with that shadow over his head for so long that his entire lifestyle now resembles a fugitive's, burner phones, decoy cars, rotating safehouses, not because he's paranoid, but because he's studied the pattern and knows he's been in its crosshairs since 2008.